Please be seated. So a few days ago, the New York Times had what I thought was a great article and illustration about the scourge of narcissism that has really plagued our society today. And they told the story about a guy who, for his gender reveal party, went out into the Arizona sort of wilderness, and he had a gun, and he shot at a target, and the idea was he was going to shoot at the target, some powder would burst, and then pink or blue would tell, boy or girl. And so he did this, and then some sparks flew. This was a very highly flammable, inflammable material, and fire started. And to his credit, he immediately called the fire department and said, "It's my fault. I'm sorry." But a week later, and 45,000 acres burned later, $8 million in damages later, he said in the article, that was actually one of the worst days of my life. And I thought, if that was just one of the worst days, I'd hate to know what the actual worst day was. And while it's a tragic story, 45,000 acres burned, it is kind of a lighthearted and humorous story, I think, about how narcissism works these days. And I think a lot of it, as the article talked about, has to do with performance. And it said performative happiness. How we perform, how happy we are, or how lucky we are on social media, it's all about one-upsmanship. And so part of what we do on social media when we're trying to be happy and performing that happiness is we're really trying to, humble brag way, sort of one-up other people. Like, oh, your gender reveal was this, but here, let me try to top it. I think with the shootings that we have just experienced in the last couple days, there is another side to performative happiness. You could call it performative evil. And so in the same way, the logic, the mechanism works. We need an audience, and social media gives us this audience. And now, so our narcissistic behavior, now this time turned in an evil way. How can I one-up other people in an evil way now is reinforced by this mechanism, where social media is both a window where we can now learn different things that happen immediately, and I can now be let me imitate or try to top that thing that happened. It's a window that gives us this news immediately, but it's also a stage on which we can perform our own sort of actions that are going to one-up someone else in a good or evil way and spread it out through all the world. And so I think while narcissism has always been a problem in our society and just human culture, I think we are living in a time, particularly given the technology and the fact that we all live on social media, whether we want to really admit that to ourselves or not, it's making it much worse. And so how can we combat this scourge of narcissism, of vanity? And in our reading today from the Old Testament in Ecclesiastes, we have one very powerful answer. Vanity of vanities, says the teacher, all is vanity. And so the first thing to know about this passage and this word vanity, which comes up 38 times in the book, is that the Hebrew word that we translate as vanity really means sort of, it's like spirit, breath, puff of air, and it means sort of similar to what vanity means, but it really means it's all insubstantial. You can't control it. It's like, how are you going to try to control a stream? And so the author is saying that true wisdom is found when you realize that everything in life, your accomplishments, what your hopes, your dreams, all of that is hebel. It's this insubstantial thing that you really can't control. And so Ecclesiastes' answer to this scourge of narcissism is to say, hey, wake up. That phone you're staring at, that iPad, that is not reality. That's all just hebel. That's all just vanity. That is insubstantial. That's not real life, and you know that's not real life. Let's put that away. And what's great about this answer the idea that this kind of deep world sort of kind of weary wisdom can defeat narcissism is that it's not a message that is only directed to Christians. You don't need to believe any Christian doctrine to understand or to take hold of this message. And we can see this in the history of literature, how different writers and authors took this idea, vanity of vanities, says the teacher, all is vanity. And one great example is the French writer, intellectual Voltaire, who hated Christianity, hated the Catholic Church, and thought the Bible was totally ridiculous. And when Louis XV's mistress, Madame de Pompadour, asked him, she had just become a Christian, she said, would you mind just writing a summary for me of the Psalms? He said, Madame, that's not really, it's not my thing. Someone else would do a better job. But what he did do later in his life is he wrote a summary, a précis of Ecclesiastes. And even though he was this great critic of Christianity, when you read his précis, his summary of Ecclesiastes, there's no satire, there's no sarcasm, there's no cutting wisdom or wit there. He's very sincere. He took these ideas that this author was saying very seriously, and you can tell in the way he treats it. You can also think about Herman Melville. So Ishmael is on the boat, and he steering, he falls asleep, and then he's jolted awake. And Melville has a little reverie, the narrator, about life and how, again, life is all vanity. You can't really trust anything in certain. And then he says something very interesting. He says, and the world has yet to really grasp this, what he calls unchristian knowledge of Ecclesiastes. And he's right in a way. There's nothing particularly Christian or not Christian about this message. It's just sort of a universal message. And finally, I think one of the most famous examples is in Tolstoy's War and Peace, where Prince Andrei has been shot, and he's now at the Battle of Austerlitz on the ground. He's looking up at the sky, and he realizes, oh my God, vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Everything is insubstantial. It was all meaningless except for this sky. And at that moment, he has a sort of awakening to real wisdom and a conversion, and then he begins his life. And so that's one very powerful answer to how we can defeat the scourge of narcissism, which is to realize that this life is just all hebel. It's insubstantial. You can't control it. It's meaningless. Put the phone down. It's not reality. And I really wish that Jesus had been a teacher of wisdom. I really wish that, because then Christianity could be intellectually respectable. That authors like Tolstoy or Thackeray in his Vanity Fair, he references Ecclesiastes, and he says in a very funny way, he says, all is vanity, but that doesn't mean that we don't, here and there like that taste of roast beef. And just because life is vanity doesn't mean we can't take pleasure, and that's also what Ecclesiastes says. So let's take pleasure today. And that is a powerful wisdom. And I wish Jesus went around teaching that, because Christianity could be intellectually respectable, and it could also be understandable. It makes sense. You come here, you say, how are we going to deal with all these shootings and this horror and my grief? And we can hear these words that are a little bit fatalistic, but ultimately comforting. All is vanity. Don't worry. It's meaningless. But in a way, that's good, because then we could just live in the moment right now. And I so wish Jesus could do this. But let's think about what happened with Jesus. So he came into the world, and his own family said, he is crazy. We don't understand a word he's saying. He's actually crazy, and that's what they use. They say ecstasy. He stands outside of himself. Our Jesus is crazy. And his hometown rejected him. They said, you think you're a prophet, you're a nobody. We know you, you're Joseph's son, the carpenter. Your teachings, we're not going to listen to you, you're a nobody. And so much of his society, they cheered on. They wanted him to be tortured and then executed. And when it happened, they were excited. They said, thank you. And his closest disciples betrayed him, not just once, but 3 times at the very end. And so what does this tell us about Jesus in our life today? what would we do if Jesus were here? You know, I think most of us would probably say he's insane. And then the few of us who did follow him would probably betray him. Because how could you not betray him? Peter, his closest disciple, betrayed him 3 times. And do you think you're better than Peter? Are you more morally courageous than Peter? And so I wish Jesus had just come in and done a simple thing. I'm going to teach you some wisdom, some sort of stoic-like philosophy. You learn this, you can overcome your vanity and be a better person, but he didn't. He came, he lived this life, everyone rejected him, and that points to the fact that if he were here today, we also would probably reject him and cheer on his crucifixion. And so what Jesus' answer to that question, how are you going to overcome this narcissism, it's a very different one, and it's a much harder one. And that answer is, to overcome narcissism, you have to admit that you are the narcissist. It's not just the gunman over here who's a crazy white nationalist. It's not the people who are bitter, they hold on to their guns and their religion. You are the narcissist. You are that person. You are the one who crucified Jesus. You and I, not just you, but me too. Me first. You know, push comes to shove, I'm out of there. I don't want to be executed. I have a family. You know, I have children. I don't want to, don't make this costly to me. And so that is the ultimate wisdom that Jesus teaches us, which is that the only way we will overcome this narcissism is to believe that is to admit that we are ultimately the narcissist. And when we do that, then we can begin as step one. I'm not saying that's the only step. There are obviously many things we can do and we should do to make our society better. But unless we can do this step one, we will go nowhere. Because as an Orthodox priest once said, you know, God can save the sinner that you are, but not the saint that you pretend to be.